And welcome to The Bottom Line, where we get into the details of the main business and economic stories of the day. Donald Trump has won the U.S. presidential elections. For Europe, this means adapting rather quickly, it seems, to what Trump's return to the White House means in the wider sense in geopolitics and very tangible matters like energy, trade, tech, and relations with China. To discuss these matters, I'm now joined by Professor Begg from the European Institute at the London School of Economics. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Good evening to you.
So let's jump straight into the issues at hand and what's on everybody's minds. Trump promised to be tougher on China than he was last time, while Europe tries to maintain some kind of ambiguity towards Beijing. Will the EU be able to take its own path, or perhaps will it be forced to be in lockstep with the new administration in Washington?
Well, there are two distinct answers to that question. The first is that on the whole, Europe is going to want to be aligned more with the US than with China. Therefore, it's going to be under pressure, particularly from a Trump administration, to try to do similar things to what the Americans are doing. But the second sort of answer is that there is a fear that European companies, European exporters, will be hit by the tariffs that Trump proposes to impose across the board. And although he may target China specifically and more severely, Europe could well be caught up in the kind of tariff war that Trump seems to want to initiate. And if you think about it, that's going to be bad news for those countries, particularly Germany, which export most to China. Although in the last year or two, China has reduced its dependence on particularly the German automobile exports. So Germany is already struggling as a result of changes in China. So these things add up to not a very good prospect for Europe's largest economy.
And then Europe, which wants to go greener, and at the same time, it desperately needs to improve its competitiveness. How can it expect Trump's presidency to impact these priorities, and how will it impact the Green Deal, for instance?
I don't think the Green Deal is going to go away. I know there are pressures, particularly in countries like Poland, to tone it down a bit and not have so rapid a change to green energy. But there's also a very broad consensus across much of Europe that we need to do more to decarbonize the electricity system in particular. And there's an open question about what's going to happen in the US with Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, a strangely named act, which was really about trying to promote green activity in the United States. Now, Trump may come in saying, I want to undo this to stop spending money on green projects. But he will face opposition from Congress because so many senators and members of the House of Representatives managed to add on things to Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act that benefited their individual states. And undoing that will be politically very tricky for Trump if he wants to curb what he seems to have inherited. So mixed messages, therefore, about the Green Deal.
And what about the competitiveness front? Because following Mario Draghi's report, this is a number one priority for Europe.
Well, this is where Europe faces its own dilemmas. They're not really related to Trump. It's whether the European economies can get together sufficiently to deliver some of the things that Draghi has mentioned. Higher innovation, a greater reliance on green energy. He also wants a big fund to engage in investment. And we saw the immediate reaction from the German finance minister to that proposal, which was a resolute nein. He was not going to do this. So Europe has its own problems in trying to deal with competitiveness. They're going to be slightly aggravated by the concerns about the tariffs. But I think there's another aspect of Trump which may be worth mentioning. It is not maybe quite so obvious. And that is, if he starts to insist on European economies, European countries spending far more on defence, then the likely pressure is going to be on public finances in countries other than Poland, obviously, which has already done this, to increase their spending on defence. And that could be at the expense of other things that European governments want to introduce. So there is going to be quite severe pressure, I fear, on public finances as a result of Trump's presidency, if he follows through on some of the things he's been talking about. We should maybe also recall that some of what Trump says isn't necessarily what comes out when he starts to make decisions.
So does this basically mean that presidency, Trump 2.0, means more expenditures for Europe all the way around?
Probably yes. The only thing that might be a silver lining in this rather dark cloud is that Trump, and yet another his commitments, is captured in the phrase drill, baby, drill. He wants to expand US output of gas and oil. And if that were to happen, the likelihood is that it would reduce oil and gas prices globally, not by a huge amount, but enough to make a difference. So it could be that some of the cost pressures on European producers, those who are still linked to using gas and electricity, could reduce very slightly. So you really need to dig into some of the different angles that Trump is pushing on the economy to work out what's going to happen.
Is it possible that with Trump's motto of drill, baby, drill, this might actually be an opportunity for Europe to perhaps take on US energy, US LNG, and replace it with, to actually replace Russian LNG with US supplies?
Well, there's two things. There's sources of supply, but there's also the effect on price. Yes, if Trump's activities mean that there is more production of fracked gas in the US, then that's going to add to the supply potentially available to Europe. And as you know, Poland already has the LNG terminals. Germany built them very rapidly, and it's quite likely, therefore, that increased supply in the US would mean easier supply and cheaper supply for European economies who've struggled to replace the Russian supply in many cases.
But discussing all these things that you have brought up, is there a possibility that Trump in the White House can actually be an opportunity for European leaders and policymakers to unite and make a real effort to work together and work on all the priorities that we know are actually at the top of their lists?
Well, I would hope so, but it doesn't seem to be in Trump's rhetoric. Make America Great Again is about domestic policy. Imposing tariffs is about domestic priorities. So I don't see much of a willingness on Trump's part in some of the things he said to be that generous towards Europe. So I wouldn't get your hopes up very high on that.
No, but I mean, is it actually the jolt that Europe needs to work together because of all the challenges that Trump poses to Europe?
Right. I thought you meant to work across the Atlantic. I think, yes, Europe working together is certainly one way in which you can hope to deal with the Trump either threat or challenge, depending on what word you want to use. The trouble is that Europe is a continent of 27 distinct member states with different priorities. And the experience of the last 20, 30 years is that Europe is slow to work together and always seems to go for the lowest common denominator. Yes, it could be the stimulus, but I think it's really up to the new Commission, where Ursula von der Leyen's agenda is promising on competitiveness. She wants to revive the EU budget, for which Piotr Serafin is going to be cross-examined in the European Parliament tomorrow. So there may be good things to come. But also, if he does the wrong things, I see you have Zelensky in your picture now. If he does the wrong things on Ukraine, there is a risk that we get a fresh wave of migration or emigration from Ukraine, which will not be easy to accommodate.
And in light of the tariffs and the priorities that Trump places on the American economy, is there a potential for a trade war, and what kind of impact might it have on transatlantic relations for Europe?
Well, the trade war is going to be with China. If Europe gets brought into it, it'll be kind of, to use the military expression, collateral damage, where European companies are affected by tariffs designed to hit China. We also don't quite know what it's going to do to direct investment flows for those countries which are seeking to attract inward investment for new factories or new forms of economic activity. It could be that diversion from China will be to Europe's benefit. But again, I wouldn't count on it, because it seems to me that Trump's whole agenda is repatriation of economic activity rather than sharing it with other parts of the world or diverting it, let's say, from East Asia to European economies. It doesn't sound like a very optimistic picture to me.
Indeed. And the president-elect, we know, is not a big fan of green policy making, and Trump has spoken of withdrawing from the Paris climate agreement. And this indeed may happen this time round. How would that impact energy policy in the EU, if that were indeed to happen?
I don't think it would alter Europe's view on this, because Europe's view has been established over many decades that we do need to decarbonise, not just from the perspective of climate change, but also to diminish the dependence on other parts of the world. Europe would like to be much more self-sufficient, and the way it's going to be self-sufficient is primarily through renewables rather than trying to develop oil or gas.
Okay, Professor Ian Begg, I think that is all that we have time for. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you and good evening.
And that was Professor Ian Begg from the London School of Economics with us today on The Bottom Line. I was your host, Marie Cato. Make sure you join us every weekday on Business Arena at 5 p.m. CET on TVP World. And for more regional business stories, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Coming up next, World Talks. Goodbye.